All right, folks, we're on to our second episode of No Nodes, which will be the FrameBlend. So again, this is in the retime nodes. We just did these two and the append clip, and now we're doing FrameBlend. So here in this, here you can go to the roto. You can see that I have a transparency of a sphere with a 6-frame animation, and then just 6 frames of nothing. Over here I have a constant with no transparency, or I should say no alpha. And we merge those together and we get this. Okay. I also just threw a frame range in here, just to let the computer know, okay, frame range 1 to 12. These are very helpful when you get into timing stuff. Again, FrameBlend by default has this all set up. It says number of frames set to 5. And if you read this, it basically states that the previous 5 frames are blended in with whatever frame it's on. So if I throw this on here, you can see that we're getting this ghosting effect through the process. And it's basically freeze framing basically the last 5 frames of whatever frames it adds. So obviously at this frame, if we go back 5 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? They're all just the actual ball itself. So it's just taking each one of those and additively and equally adding those 5 frames together, and what you get is this. Basically, it's the same thing. Now we go, if we just move ahead 1 frame, right? It's basically taking, in this case, every frame, including the current frame it's on, where it's moved ahead a frame, and melted together. So again, you have 4 frames that are basically holds of this same circle, and that's why it's being so filled in. And then you got the additional one here. So we can keep going to 5, and you can see 5, they're all equally transparent, except, of course, during the overlays here, because again, this is an additive process. Whenever they overlap, you're going to see this. But you can see they're all equally together because it's taking 5, which is still in the moving process, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Now when we get to 6, you can see that it's getting a little bit brighter, because if we disable the frame blend, you could see frames 6 and 5 are exactly the same. So if we disable this now, you can see that we have basically, you know, the process of just grabbing the last 5 frames and taking all of those equally and equally adding them together in an additive process. So there's an option you can do that, or you can actually custom a range. So I'll just go ahead and do a frame range, and I'll choose 1 to 5. And again, you can see what we have here, 1 to 5. Now, if I do something like 1 to 12, again, you're going to get these 5 frames here, or I'm sorry, 6 frames here that actually are super bright. So it's blending those in together. So again, just to reiterate, it just took this frame, 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 and this frame, and added those all equally in an additive process, and that's when you get this. All right, now let's go ahead and jump into what are the applications for this. You also have a mask, like I talked about before, so if you wanted to, you can go ahead and create a roto, you could plug in a mask, and you can mask out the areas that this effect actually happens. All right, so let's talk about application. This can be used for clean plating an image that actually is still. So if you have a lockdown tripod shot, this is something that could be applicable. So here you can see I have just something of detail here, which is actually just a color bar. And if I go to this roto here, you can see that I have a simple, moving, ball in the shot. If I go to the merge here, you can see I have this. I have an alpha. I want to get rid of alpha, so I'm going to go to the shuffle node and shuffle in a black for my alpha, so there's no alpha information in there. And this is where, if you had your plate shot, you could actually animate a roto around a character that's moving through the shot, as you can see here. So what it's going to do is it's going to frame blend all of this together and mask out this area here. So if we go over here to the copy node, and what I've done is I copied in this alpha information into the copy node, so that's the new alpha. We're going to use that to drive what we'll be masking. So if I go to the frame blend, you have this little option here called foreground matte. I've set the frame range from 1 to 12, which is the animation. So if we go back to watch the ball animation, you can see it goes through an entire 12 animation process. And then the frame blend, if I turn this off for a minute, you can see what we're looking at in the frame blend. And instead of using a frame blend, what you're doing is making a foreground matte clean plate. So again, you can hover over this for the information, and you can see that it's only going to grab the frames that have a 0 information in regards to the alpha. Okay, so any area of the alpha, so if we go back to the alpha here that I hand animated, it's going to just take these areas right here that are here and then use those as the masking operation to create the clean plate. So it's not really a frame blend anymore. It's really a clean plate process once you click on this. And now you can see what has happened. Now, in regards to grain and so forth, you might find that it might be a little bit, you might have a grain issue or regraining issue that you got to deal with, but it basically cleaned out your image. So again, if you have a still shot, and again, you'll have to worry about grain in the midst of this, but if you have a bird fly around your shot, you can actually just, copy in a roto node, try to get that bird, and it's going to use the previous and forward frames to do this. There are many other ways to do this process through temporal means and other ways, but this is just a quick way of kind of showing what you can do in regards to using frame blends. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to when this doesn't work. Okay, so clean plating is not going to work if your character stays in the same place for the entire shot. So if we go to this roto here, I've animated this sphere so that it moves from left or right. And the reality is, if we look at the first frame and the last frame, he is still, or just the ball, is still basically staying put in this quadrant right here. So he never physically or ever leaves this frame, so there's no way to clean plate it because we don't know what's behind him, right? So if we kind of take a look at this, right? If we go to the clean plate, if we come to the frame blend now, you can see what I have here is and I haven't got to this yet, so let me go to that. I can go ahead and do a foreground matte, right? Turn that on, and what I get is this black area here. So in the attempt to try to, and again, this is a little bit different. This animation is 12 frames, so I can put the frame range to 12. It doesn't really matter, because no matter what, that area is never not occluded. Okay, so you can see here, this is the area that it could not clean plate out. So very, very, very important. The last thing I could talk about here in regards to, I think I'll go back to the original here and just disable this roto node here, is the option to actually kind of write down the count of how many frames are actually blending, and you can drive that information with something else in the future, which is the output image count too. So what you can do here is you can create a new count, which I did right here, and I just labeled it count.red, right? So I'll go ahead and click on that. And if you just do new, you can do rename too, but I just call it count.red. That gave me a new channel, which if you put your viewer to your thing here, you should see, let's see where it's at. Oops, that was the wrong node, my fault. So output image count, and we want to hit, we could just do count.red or whatever and create it. And if you go to that channel specifically, you can see it's just red, but you can see the physical count here, and that's 12. So again, depending on my frame blend and how many frames I'm blending at any one time, it's going to actually have that information put here in every pixel, in one channel being the red channel, because you don't need red, green, and blue channel to drive information. And this information can be pulled into an expression or whatever to drive other information a little bit later on. All right, so let's get to the some purposes where you might want to use retiming prep for motion blur or something like that. So here I have a actual, I'll go put my viewer to it here, and for some reason I'm on the wrong channel. So here we are, and we got this red ball, and this time I made this sort of scale up a little bit, so the illusion of it's moving towards camera. So again, it's a full 12 frames. We got the background, we merge it. I gave it a frame range just for the heck of it, 112. And then we have this frame blend, which I have set to number of frames set to 3. So which is giving this motion blur feel, as you can see. And the purposes of doing this is prep for retiming. I want this clip to go really fast. And anything that is fast most likely will have more motion blur, depending on the shutter of your camera. So I'm already prepping it with motion blur with this cheap way, which is basically creating a ghosting step of the previous frames, in this case the last 3 previous frames, in sort of a forward-based motion blur. So if you see, the animation I have is only to frame 7 here. It's not all the way to frame 12. So again, I just put the number of frames, it's prepped, and then I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but the retiming tool has been added with a speed of 2, which just doubles up the speed. So now if I go ahead and play it, it has the illusion of motion blur, which sometimes help. If I didn't actually have the frame blend on, so I'll go ahead and turn that off, right? And then I do a retime. You can see even the retime tool is somewhat creating a motion blur effect here with the shutter. And you can see if I take the shutter here, you can put it to 0, but this is how it would have looked if you had no motion blur, okay? And again, there is this sort of cheat that they have here with the shutter, which does the same thing. So you can see I'm kind of adding some ghosting inside of here, and it's kind of doing it for me. But by default, you can see the shutter is just by itself. And if you wanted to change this up custom-wise in regards to how many different ghostings you want to have, a FrameBlend is a great option, okay, as you can see here. The last demonstration I want to show here is degraining, and degraining is something that it's going to take a shot that doesn't move at all. So in this case, it's not moving around, which has no motion blur or anything like that. And you can see here, I just took the color bar and I just added in a alpha channel so that without any alpha channel, it's not going to add grain. So I added digital grain. So you can see if we just kind of plug this through, we got some digital noise grain. So to basically denoise this, of course, you can use denoisers and so forth. But in this case, we can go to the frame blend, and we can just start to increase the number of frames that is, basically going to be used. Or I could just use the frame range, in this case 1 to 12. So I'll use 1 to 12, and it has used the frames 1 to 12 for the frame blend, and it's degrained it somewhat, as you can see, and the more grains you have, the better off you'll be as far as cleaning this up. So if you, obviously some people, when they have a clip, it's going to be longer than 12 frames. But if you can get this to even a crazier number to, just probably just 50 frames or 200, and the shot does not move, it's locked down on a tripod, you can actually degrain your image and still retain sharpness, which is pretty cool. So you can see the difference there. So again, it is a nice degraining technique on the exception that you have actually a lockdown camera. Some people will actually have a little bit of a lockdown camera, and if there's no motion blur, and maybe it just pans around a little bit, they can do like planar stabilization and then do this frame blend to kind of get rid of all of the grain and so forth. Yeah, there's a lot of different options you can do there. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this, and I'll see you again.